I was going to say some things without reading it, because that's normally what I do. Mark and I go a very long way back, and I have to say that over the 20 years of the Expo, you have been very generous and kind and presented a number of times. So I'm sure we're in for a treat today. But I don't know if people are aware, and I hate using this word, Mark, but that you did win last year the Senior South Australian of the Year. I don't know if people are aware of that. But so I'm going to read what they wrote about it, because I actually think it encapsulates very well rather than using my own word. Because Mark has devoted his life to improving the self-worth, well-being, mental health and life outcomes of young people. He focuses on what he calls the tough kids, and you'll see up on the screen that these two books in particular, but his latest one is just amazing if you're an educator or, I think, more so as a parent. So he continues to try and build the capacity of parents, but particularly of kids, and today, hopefully, of educators. The concluding statement says, Mark's generosity and consideration for others is profound, far-reaching and life-changing. He helped many families, and he continues to help many families, and is a relatable role model and mentor. And I think that not many of us can say that to the extent that Mark does. And there are lots of families, there may be some families in the room who Mark has made such great changes in their lives for their kids. He now has some young people going around on tour with you, so to speak, who talk about their lives, very powerful voices these kids have for us as educators to listen. And Mark, today I am sure, as you take us again on this neurodiversity journey. We went on a bit of a journey yesterday, and I certainly went away. I know I'm on my way out, but I went away with lots of thinking to do, and I'm sure today we will. So thank you very much, Mark. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Helen. Being the recipient of Senior South Australian of the Year was terrific, and I was really humbled by it. But the other thing that I have to share with you is that I'm well aware of what luck plays, or the role of luck, because I was nominated by some people who had the capacity to work through a complex nomination, and there are so many other people who do such good work that just might not have those people quietly behind them. It was a surprise to me that those people did that. Absolutely, I had no idea whatsoever, but yeah, there is luck involved. Thank you so much for coming to this keynote. I've been looking forward to it for so long. Thank you, SERU, for all you do as well. So the contents today does come from my two new books on screen. So let's get into it. Although before moving right into it, I have a very special mention. So Maney is on screen. Some of you might know Em because she is the face behind the Facebook page called NeuroWild. Yes, I want you all to get onto NeuroWild. She's an American speechie, artist and passionate neurodivergent advocate. As well, she's a mum of 3 autistic children. But her gift is beautiful. She's just got such a clever way to combine her art, neurodiversity affirming attitudes, and comments that challenge quite often as infographics. So Em has given me permission to use her work pretty much exclusively all day. I'll just sit back and be inspired by some of her work as you go through it. It will also provide you with some incredibly practical tips. Oh, feel free to take photos. Em said she doesn't mind at all, and nor do I. So, understandings about the neurodivergent world are absolutely changing at light speed in the community and then subsequently in schools. These days, we're beginning to appreciate that many of our colleagues, parents, students are neurodivergent. They're coming out of the woodwork loudly and proudly. Yet we are at an awkward crossroads in education. Are you aware that the number of SA neurodivergent students sent home, suspended or moved on from school last year were vastly overrepresented? Right alongside them, of course, were the students with disability, with challenging behaviours and those experiencing disadvantage. We know this highlights a struggle that educators have with our most vulnerable group of students. But the truth is, most educators are good people. And they want to be inclusive, and they want to offer children and families hope for the future. A big part of this difficulty are the current funding models. For a school to gain a few more resources and options to support students in need, educators are made to jump through hoops, time-consuming and hard-to-navigate processes. And when funding may be finally achieved, it is often short-term, conditional, and really difficult to re-establish. One of my friends recently wrote to me, "Mark, additional funding is the only hope for this boy you work with, but the way the department's application is structured, it will take an educator 20 hours or so to do this. There will be no guarantee of funding even after they spend their 20 hours. They will also require a functional behavioural analysis from a psychologist. This is expensive and it will take another 20 hours to prepare and likely yield information that we've already got. And the department wants this to be done on top of an educator's normal workload. It's not doable, but educators and leaders keep doing it because they want the best for kids. Funding is defended by bureaucrats, protecting a system. Their job is vastly different to our job. They are not good, they are not bad. They do not view a student's needs in the personal way that we do. And this is the hot and messy reality that is often glossed over. I cannot do that to you. It would mislead you and it would disrespect our most vulnerable students. Each of us in this room knows that until there is a helpful change in the way funding is accessed, there will be a continuing tension between the rights of a student to be included and the practicalities of being included. Recently, I met with the Assistant Minister for Autism, Emily Burke. I was so impressed. She has such a full heart and is driven to improve the well-being of those with autism, with a difference, with a disability in schools and in the community too. Emily knows there are too many barriers that prevent the accomplishments of neurodivergent young people. And such barriers are sure triggers for mental health difficulties for these people too. If you come across an unnecessary barrier in a school or in the community and it needs correcting, share it with Emily. Shoot her an email. Direct families to do the same as well. She wants to hear our stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, so she can better understand. If she knows, she can act for us. You know, this is actually a world first, so we need to get behind her and to be a part of it. I recently wrote to Emily when I discovered that if a person has a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, they are secretly disqualified from being able to join the SA police force. That's basic discrimination. Wouldn't you think people would be chosen on their qualities, their assets, their experience, their personal potentials? This is just one discrepancy between what's right and what actually happens in the wider community. Today, science and the neurodiversity movement are revolutionising the way we think about, we discuss, we offer supports to people on the ever-expanding spectrum. Judy Singer, pictured on screen, is an Australian sociologist. She coined the term neurodiversity back in 1998. She was an early campaigner for equality and inclusion. It is quite a surprise to many when they hear that we now describe conditions such as ADHD, autism, PTSD, anxiety, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, intellectual disability, tic disorders, including Tourette syndrome, and so many more under the neurodivergent umbrella. We now know that their emotional and behavioural differences are the direct result of physical differences in brain structures. Interestingly, we never say to each other, hey, how neurotypical are you? Yet my autistic clients are often asked, how autistic are you? Level 1? Level 2? Level 3? They don't like it, and nor should they. Mind you, they will often say to me privately, kind of tongue-in-cheek, oh, Mark, those neurotypicals, they're obsessed with eye contact. They've got an endless need for small talk to fill in the silent gaps. And what about their verbal drive to make sense of the emotional world and abandon perfectly good logic? And because of this, we must make huge allowances so they can fit in with us. We must be hugely sensitive when applying the descriptors neurotypical and neurodivergent, because they can inherently set us apart. They can oppose inclusion and self-worth. Many say we are all neurodiverse. Probably. Many say that we all sit on some kind of gigantic, multi-dimensional neurodiverse spectrum. Probably. There's no doubt that each of us, even in this room, is unique with our own distinctive combinations of abilities, needs, strengths, and challenges. But you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? But we're not all neurodivergent, and we're not all disabled. As well, being neurodivergent is not the same as having a disability or having a mental illness, but disability is linked to neurodivergence. A disability is recognised when a person has persistent difficulties or limitations to do what most others take for granted. It must also be understood that for many, being neurodivergent and or disabled can become their core identity. It becomes the essence of who they are, because every element in their lives is affected by their very unique neurology. Embracing neurodiversity means stretching our thinking beyond medical definitions to recognising the whole person, So increasingly in the autistic community, many prefer using the terms autism or autistic and never being referred to as someone with ASD. This is because the D in ASD stands for disorder, and it is not neuro-affirming language. Personally, I think so many of the neurodivergent young people I work with have enough to deal with without being referred to as disordered. Many also prefer the use of identity first language. This means we'd say autistic person rather than a person with autism. Just as we'd say a deaf person rather than a person who is deaf. So parts of a neurodivergent brain look different because the brain is built and wired up differently. And because of this, a neurodivergent brain has an operating system that is a wonderful variation of the human rhythm. It's like being a fabulous Mac, but living in a PC world. And there's nothing wrong, just different. And this style brings strengths and challenges as well. Now, I only have time to introduce 3 people whose contributions I think are pretty remarkable. First up on screen is Hans Asperger. Hans was an Austrian physician, and in 1944 his landmark paper described autism in children. He then went on to write more than 300 publications around autism. He also recognised way back then the upsides to autism. He wrote, "Not everything that steps out of line and is thus different must necessarily be inferior. In fact, because of their divergent ways of thinking and experiencing the world, autistic people can accomplish such wonderful things." His work in autism was truly groundbreaking. Years later, in 1981, this wonderful woman on screen, Lorna Wing, built on Hans's work. She was a psychiatrist and a pioneer in the field, and she advanced the understandings of autism worldwide. She proposed the condition we used to refer to as Asperger syndrome. She did this in 1976. And at the time, she identified a group of children with milder autistic traits who, with skill building, through early interventions, grew into adults that had full, rich and independent lives. Today, people are identified medically as levels 1, 2 or 3 on the autism spectrum, with 3 showing the strongest traits. And finally, here is psychologist Tony Atwood. He lives in Queensland. He is an associate professor at Griffith University. His career spans 5 decades, and he truly is the world's foremost expert on autism and a wonderful person to listen to. But the real honour for Tony is that his work has directly and indirectly helped every single Australian. Parents, aunties, uncles, neighbours, educators and allied health professionals to understand and appreciate a condition that was once veiled in mystery and ignorance. He continues to lecture, make podcasts and do interviews. Okay, just to frame this, I've got a few fast facts around autism for you. Officially, about 1 in every 150 Australians have autism. However, Autism Spectrum Australia puts prevalence rates at 1 in 70. Yet many are saying autism is likely running at 1 in 44, and that equates to about 2 autistics in each Australian classroom. One thing is for sure, more children will be diagnosed with autism this year in 2023 than with AIDS, diabetes and cancer combined. Autism is a co-occurring condition. This means up to 70% of autistics also have at least one other condition. As educators, this leaves us with 2 challenges that we need to be mindful about. First, to ensure a young person is identified as autistic when you feel they should be. Yep, I know, that can be problematic. Secondly, to make sure any co-occurring conditions are identified as well as the autism. And to make matters more complex, some of the co-occurring conditions do not appear until later in adolescence. So just when you think you've got it all wrapped up, all nailed down and you're doing really well, it gets more complex sometimes. We think about 60% of children with autism also have anxiety. Yet in the so-called neurotypical population, anxiety runs at about 25%. Many are now saying there's been a 20% increase in anxiety in both populations since the beginning of COVID. About 3/4 of those identified with autism have the co-occurring condition of ADHD or ADD. In the neurotypical population, ADHD and ADD run somewhere between 8 to 10%. And the principal audiologist of Little Ears says close to 40% of their clients with autism also meet the criteria for auditory processing disorder. Yet in the general population, 5% of children meet this criteria. The 4-to-1 ratio is another fact. The 4-to-1 male to female ratio is one of the most consistent findings in autism. Similarly, the 4-to-1 male to female ratio is also a consistent finding in ADHD. Yes, us boys always win. Autism has no one single cause. And given its complexity, there are probably many causes. We understand that both genetics and environment play roles. It tends to, but not exclusively, run in families. One of the most stabilising things kids need is a blueprint to work from. Let me explain my blueprint theory. There's Beth. Beth's a client of mine, and so is her daughter. Okay, Beth's an autistic mum. Beth describes herself as being the black sheep of the family, always dressed in a snazzy zebra costume. At 34 years of age, Beth and her 9-year-old daughter were both identified with autism. Her daughter's comment was, "Mum, if you can do this, so can I." They threw a party together. Well, as much as a party that they could handle together with their sensory issues and their food intolerances. So they ate cake and they watched a movie that they'd both watched 20 times before. Beth's daughter described the feeling as though she could finally breathe and breathe in unison with her mum. We also know that if you have autism, you're more likely to get totally absorbed in stuff, totally passionate about stuff. Life generates this all-in or all-nothing style. Something is absolutely interesting, or you can't make me do it. Something is absolutely fascinating, or you can't stop me from doing it. Special interests, they range from the quirky to the bizarre to the marvellous. While some obsessions can push the balance of life right out of whack, we also appreciate the comfort, the relief, the escape, and the pleasure that some of these provide. And who knows, this over-interest, this passionate zeal to follow one's thing could lead to wonderful things in the future too. Another fact is the different perspective neurodivergence can bring. I have two delightful autistic insights from a client of mine, Tom. And the first one happened when he was in year 7. He told me that there was no way he was going on this school camp, and he thrust the glossy camp brochure in my face. And then he snatched it back. "No, I know where it is. I'll read the bit to you," he said. And he read the offending part. And this is what it said. "This resilience building camp boasts a range of activities that will change you forever." He stopped and he threw the brochure down in disgust, and he looked at me and he said, "How dare they? I don't want to be changed forever, Mark. I like who I am. How arrogant are these people to take me away and change me forever? I'm not going." And then in year 8, he refused point blank to participate in a maths test. I asked him why, and he said, "It's really hard to talk about this, Mark. It's my teacher. And normally he's really good. But 2 days ago, he and the whole class, they made cheat sheets, ready to use them in the test." How bad is that? The teacher's helping everyone to cheat. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do that test. I'm not going to be part of a cheating classroom. Well, we sorted it out, and needless to say, we refer to them these days as formula sheets. My final fact for now, and it's worth knowing just to deepen your awareness and your sensitivity, is that people who do not identify with the sex they were assigned to at birth are 5 times likely to be autistic. Gender diverse people are far more likely to report they are autistic or suspect they have undiagnosed autism. I couldn't do this today without stopping for a little while to raise the anxieties of parents about their children being different. Each of us dream for our children to grow up, feel comfortable with who they are, to be accepted by others, and to live a life without limitations or barriers. And a long time ago, this lovely woman on screen, Emily Pearl Kingsley, wrote "Welcome to Holland." Emily never imagined how iconic her piece of writing would become. And in my latest book, I actually wrote to Emily and asked if I could use this piece of writing. And she wrote back almost instantly and said, "Yes, of course, it'll cost you." And I wrote back, "How much would it cost?" She said, "May I have a copy of your book?" Such a lovely person. Her piece of writing that I will read to you has won multiple awards, because it draws us together to appreciate the anxiety, the surprise, the grief, and the trek to acceptance that confronts every parent raising a child with beautiful diversity. I'd like to read it in the hope that it deepens the connections you forge with your own children, with parents that you work alongside, with friends, or perhaps within your own family. Well, it's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and you make your wonderful plans, the Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may begin to learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's also very exciting. After months of anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags, off you go. Hours and hours later, the plane lands and the flight attendant announces your arrival. Welcome to Holland. Holland, you say. What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamt of going to Italy. That was my destination. But there's been a change in the flight plan for you. They've landed you in Holland, and there you will stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a terrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy brand new guidebooks. And you must learn an entirely new language. Could add NDIS on the end of that. And of course you will meet a whole new group of people that you would have never met previously. Holland, well, it's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy. It's less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice, well, Holland has got windmills. Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy. And they're all bragging about what wonderful time they had there and their things that their children got up to and their achievements. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever go away, because the loss of that dream is a very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things all about your Holland. That one can be pretty tough to sit through, and I'm sorry if it was for any of you. But it touches each of us in a different and a tender way. And Welcome to Holland reminds me of so many of the families I work with. The challenges of raising a neurodivergent child cannot be overlooked because it is a frequent trigger for relationship breakdowns. And this isn't confined to couples, but it includes the loss of extended family, leaving parents isolated from the very people they need most. Deb is now a single mum. She's 40. She has 3 kids. 2 are neurodivergent. She's had to develop that new guidebook, different priorities, and different options to manage her children's emotions, sensory issues, and emotional regulation. She says, and then there's the cooking. the demand for food to be cooked and presented in a special way, sometimes cooking a meal more than once because for some reason it couldn't be accepted the first time. I love our life, but it's not the family I had in mind when I started out. The way people look at us sometimes as if to say, oh, I wouldn't put up with that from my kids. If only you parented better. To be honest, I probably thought that before I set out on this journey too. What I've learned is that nurturing their emerging spirit and keeping that separate from their wobbly emotions and behaviours is everything. As I mentioned earlier, the medicalising of these conditions, words such as disability, disorder, syndrome, deficit, have long negatively influenced community attitudes too. And I can explain with a recent example. So yes, last year I had to do some tours with the Australia Day Council. And frequently I ended up in an auditorium like this, speaking to a couple of hundred Year 9, Year 10, Year 11 and Year 12 students. Oh my God, that takes such courage. It does not matter how badly this goes today. If I could survive that, I can survive anything. I was in Port Pirie and I was talking about autism, and I said I was so sorry that the term autism spectrum disorder, ASD, has got the shameful word disorder in it, because autistics are not disordered. They're not less. And if you are autistic, you are perfect as you are. Be proud of who you are. And if you have a friend with autism, be proud of their difference and tell them that. Now, in all of this, of course, there's that back row up there of boys who are in about Year 11, who have their arms crossed and stony expressions on their faces. And you just know you're probably not going to reach them. So I came to the end of my talk and the boys started to file down to head out. And the next minute, a lovely Year 10 girl bobbed up in front of me and wanted to chat with me, but I got a tap on the shoulder from the first boy. And he pulled me really close to him and he put his arm around me and shook my hand and said, "Thank you." He said, "My friend's the third one in the row behind me. He never talks about his autism because he's ashamed of it. Now we can." And each one of his friends grabbed me and gave me the same kind of hug on the way out. And you think, isn't that, as educators, isn't that all we're trying to do with young people that we work with? Changing attitudes in the realest possible way. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there's this young girl, Year 10, standing in front of me, bursting to talk. And she's got 3 friends in tow. And she goes, Mark, I'm autistic." Oh, I can't believe I said that. I've never said that to anyone before. You see, I see a psychologist, she's really nice, and my mum and dad, and they all say I'm autistic, and they all want me to do that test that says I'm autistic, and I've resisted doing it for the last 2 years because I thought if it turned out I was autistic, which I think I am, it means that I'm less and not good enough. I'm going to do that test. As it turns out, I have ADHD. But I don't see myself as deficit or disordered. But I can tell you I was not a good fit at school. I was a gorgeous academic failure. I couldn't string 2 words together on a page because I couldn't sit down long enough. So I never passed out of high school. My degrees and my 16 books, they came much, much later when I could at least keep my body still. We need to help each other to shake off that thinking around that deficit model point of view and work from a much healthier strength-based model. Oh, absolutely. Early intervention is invaluable. But an over-focus on shortcomings, deficits, and topping up deficiencies is an ill-conceived and a really unhealthy approach. And what does experience teach us? That a strengths-based approach is best. We've learnt that time, growth, maturation is the best approach. We've learnt that some targeted skill building, all wrapped in loving connectedness, are the primary collaborators to leading a life filled with meaning and purpose. So there are two facts I would love you to take away. The first is that our neurodivergent kids, they're not broken, they're not deficit, they're not disordered, and they do not need to be fixed up. They simply walk to the beat of a different drum. The second is that they will always walk to the beat of that drum. They will grow up to be adults with autism, or adults like me with ADHD, or Tourette's, or learning difficulties, or whatever. Please, let's value neurodivergence so our kids can grow into it with pride. Without our acceptance and positivity about their diversity, they can't do this. And a simple beginning way to do this is to enjoy and discuss the pleasure of their quirks, their talents, their interests, while supporting them to gently overcome barriers and hurdles. As humans, we are wired to connect. In fact, our good mental health totally relies on it. As well, connection can happen in all kinds of ways. Yet so many of the children, teens and young adults I work with share how desperately they want connections, but they are so rubbish at initiating them or sustaining them. And this is what inspired the writing of What's the Buzz, our friendship program. Madhavi and I are so proud of it. And Em's right. Teaching social skills should have nothing to do with the teaching of all kids how to be beavers. We never dreamt 12 years later What's the Buzz would grow into 3 programs, be backed by independent clinical research, positioned in 140 countries and in several languages. Last week it went to Estonian. Don't know how big that market will be. And become the gold standard in teaching social and emotional literacy. Every so often we're asked to explain how What's the Buzz is neuro-affirming. Does it respect differences in individuals' abilities and how they interact with the world around them? Might it inadvertently encourage masking and ableism? And these are important questions to be asked, not just to me about What's the Buzz, but about everything we do with the young people we work with. So What's the Buzz embraces that all human beings experience the social and emotional world differently. And because of this, have the right to express their feelings and emotions and their actions in their own compassionate way. We also coach that it's perfect to show emotions in ways that are true to oneself. After all, our incredible uniqueness brings refreshing and creative perspectives to every social interaction. Yes, we are teaching the social and emotional code, a favoured system for communication. But increasingly we must acknowledge it is not the only system, and nor are we expecting anyone to strictly adhere to it. On this, there is a clear difference between respectfully teaching the social and emotional code and forcing a young person to do it and leaving them feeling suppressed. As well, many young people, including many autistics, want to understand the social and emotional code, so they have options to use what neurotypicals access. More than anything, this is about choice. We deeply understand the notion of masking and ableism, where a person, especially an autistic person, can be made to feel less or vulnerable and intimidated by not being true to themselves. More on masking a little later. Our goal in What's the Buzz is to simply show there are hundreds of social and emotional issues that crop up in life. And there are hundreds of ways to work assertively and kindly with them. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes solve them. There is no one prescriptive way. I should share a little about What's the Buzz groups we run at Wayville. We have a huge beaver population. We run 16 groups of 10 kids, teens and adults each week. We start children at 5 years. They often do What's the Buzz 5, 6, 7 times over. Our oldest groups are in their mid-20s, and they've taught us something that I need to share with you. You see, initially, I held a view that my job as an educator was to teach kids new skills and then let them fly solo. And that certainly works for some. But I've now learnt that there remains a very large cohort of young people, especially those wonderful neurodivergent thinkers, that need and thrive on the continuity of a safe, welcoming and structured group. Without the opportunity to come along each week to connect and share with the other beavers and squirrels, they would not be connecting. And they will tell you themselves they'd be at home, probably in their bedrooms, and most certainly feeling lonely, sad, even depressed. In this safe setting, they often want to compare their thoughts and feelings with others. They'll say, I just want to check if this is normal. And you'd be amazed by the affection in the sharing. So a few weeks ago, somebody asked, hey, has anyone else here got autism? Plenty of hands went up. And an absolutely positive and encouraging discussion about autism followed. By the way, where else do you get such a good quality conversation? And the next moment, another called out. So that makes you a single A battery. What do you mean? Well, autism, A. Well, I have autism and ADHD, said somebody else. So I'm a double A battery. And within a heartbeat, another group member said, well, I'm triple A. You got it. I got the anxiety as well. Please never forget just how vital it is to hold a safe place where children and young people can breathe, have fun together while they learn. It fills my heart with joy to watch more and more schools with increasing numbers who are arranging diversity groups and groups just like What's the Buzz, so people can meet and feel a freedom. And the quotes that I'm about to read out to you came from a group of 10-year-old boys as they finished up last term in their group at What's the Buzz. First one says, "Thanks for liking me for who I am. I didn't even have to pretend. You just liked me. I hate doing stuff after school. Mum made me do this. I've told her I want to come back. This is the first time I've ever felt part of a group. Thanks for your friendship. You've all been so friendly to me, but not just in here in the room, but before the group starts and after it's finished. Today has been my best day of the week because of you. Thank you for being my friends." To me, these quotes affirm diversity, difference, acceptance, and connections, the very spirit of everything we should be doing with our young people. Yes, we see so many kids and young people who do feel different for the wrong reasons. And feeling like this is that certain trigger for mental health difficulties. Knowing how to create friendship and good connections, that's a vital protective factor against these dark forces. Finding one's tribe and knowing how to find it is literally life-saving. And this is a reminder that nurturing diversity and celebrating connectedness must take centre stage in everything we do with children and young people, in music, in maths, in home group, in PE, in class, in school assemblies, in sports teams, everywhere. I promised that I'd touch on masking, so here goes. So masking, of course, is when an autistic person feels they must suppress a natural autism-related behaviour and replace it with a more socially accepted behaviour. And there is the temptation here for an unaware neurotypical to say, "Oh, come on, what's the big deal? We all have to mask to some degree. That's how we get by in different situations." Well, that is true. We all do mask to make small adjustments to help us fit in better or adapt to a new circumstance at hand. But when an autistic masks, it calls for a monumental and disproportionate effort. The cost over time, exhaustion, anxiety, confusion about one's own identity, depression, and an increased risk of suicidal thoughts. The process of learning and applying social skills, particularly for an autistic person, is nowhere as easy or as natural as it is for the average neurotypical. Well, that's if such a beast really does exist. But you know what I mean. We must be incredibly sensitive to this fact. And let me explain with my client, BJ. He's in year 8 this year. BJ, he's overwhelmed by having to make eye contact with others in conversation. He knows it's a big thing, and he knows that it shows respect and connection. And his kind parents and his beaut teachers over the years have insisted that he does it, over the last 12 years, in fact, because it's what's expected. He tries, but it just turns into a distressing hardship, and he tears up and his eyes water. And then he'll blink to try and get rid of the tears, and he'll look up away from the eyes, and then he'll look down and he'll try to look back at your eyes. But it is so uncomfortable. He would do it if he could, but he can't. And from a place of love, he's been pressured over the years to mimic a non-verbal behaviour because it is customary. And here right here in this space, here sits our new learning. A better and more respectful approach would be to understand his utter intimidation when he feels like he has to make eye contact. And then to give him the freedom not to do eye contact if he can't. BJ, he's beautiful, he's kind-hearted, he would do eye contact if he really could. This is from Michael, one of my clients. He's 43 years young. I've learnt to copy socially successful people. And these days, during introductions, at functions and in meetings, I imitate the speech and body language that will help others see me in a favourable light. Want to know the truth? I do it really well. I run a hugely successful national IT company, and I take time out after such events to recover from the exhaustion and feeling like a fraud. And this one happened last Monday. This is Richard. Richard's 12. As usual, effervescent, pacing my room as he debriefed about the last 2 weeks at school. He's beautifully neurodivergent, autistic and ADHD, AA battery, and is led by his warm heart and his intelligence and his enthusiasm for learning and for life. So how's it going with your teacher, Richard? I asked. Oh, she doesn't get me, Mark. You know what I'm like. I call out when she asks a question because I just get so excited about my learning. But she doesn't like it. So when I call out, she uses a disapproving face. She stops and stares at me. Everyone stops and stares at me too. Once she's finished her stare, she continues and she excludes me. She treats me like a puppy. She thinks if she doesn't reward my calling out, I'll stop doing it. She has no idea, she's never asked, how many times I actually stop myself from calling out all day. I'm not trying to upset her. I like her. This one is from Mel. She's 35 and another client. You'll enjoy this. So a few years ago, I watched my sister-in-law give her mother a bunch of flowers. I'd never given anyone flowers before. Honestly, my thinking was, why spend so much money on something that will die and give you awful hay fever while it's dying? But I witnessed my mother-in-law's pure joy in that moment, and I learnt. Since then, I bring her a bunch of flowers each time we visit because she loves them and me for it. I even arrange them in a vase for her despite having a panic attack over choosing the most appropriate bunch each time. Oh, life would be so much easier without those bloody flowers. And what about 11-year-old Ella? She's kind, friendly, and calming to be around, and she has the steadiness and wisdom beyond her years. As an autistic, she's always been hugely noise sensitive. For the first 5 years of school, every week, she endured overwhelming and hectic noise in the gymnasium during her PE lessons. It was unbearable, but she masked up and persevered to fit in and be compliant. She spent a lot of the lesson with hands on ears and would melt down once she arrived at home on those evenings or afternoons. By year 4, the principal, against her better judgment, allowed Ella to wear ear defenders. Her better judgment for Ella was to get used to the noise because that's what happens in the real world with real people. Her ear defenders helped, but Ella didn't really like looking different. And then in year 6, a new PE teacher arrived. She found the noise in the gym intolerable and called it an unsafe work environment. She shared the problem with the students, staff, and the parents. Ella felt for the first time she could share her noise problem with this teacher. The PE teacher made it very clear that the problem might have been big for Ella, but it was actually a big problem for everyone. She also acknowledged the depth of Ella's distress. Subsequently, she bought enough ear defenders for everyone in every lesson, including herself. Actually, while on PE in schools, something I come across all of the time. I have too many autistic clients, usually boys, who are crushed by having to take their school uniforms off and be semi-naked in front of peers as they change into their PE uniform. Many mask because getting an exemption just feels too hard. There'll be discussions, judgments and justifications that trigger their inadequacy or their feelings of inadequacy. So they get changed in change rooms that do not offer enough privacy and are hardly supervised. And they are so embarrassed and so uncomfortable that, yes, they become targets. As we know, there are such simple solutions to this, to PA systems blasting memos and music into classrooms, to noisy assemblies, sports days and so on. There are always solutions when we choose to look for them. Oh, meet my client Dylan. He's 16, bright, fabulous at science, dislikes English, especially poetry. He's autistic and he hates anyone referring to it as his superpower. His teachers often talk about the gap between his beautiful intellect and his low academic output, especially his written output. But they forget the impact of his dysgraphia, his co-occurring condition, because it's kind of invisible. Dylan does not have the same communication and social skills as his peers, and because he presents so well, it's easy to forget this. Dylan will often say, so a teacher, my science teacher, for example, will say, well, get your books out and go on from where you got up to yesterday. Dylan goes, I'll tell you what happens in my head, Mark. Where's my book? What book? What were we doing yesterday? How will I find that? He said, but now I've got older. I just watch what people next to me are doing. And I soon learn really quickly which book, where we're up to, and I work out all of these cues around me. But it's taken him the 16 years to get there. And we must be really mindful of this. Everything he does is harder than it is for other kids. With great effort, he can learn anything, but it is hard to make that learning into a generalised skill that can transfer across into the next situation and be applied really fluently and easily in that next situation. So what Dylan learns today in this lesson is not easily retrieved tomorrow or in the next lesson. To illustrate the everyday stress of his brain having to deal with a neurotypical world, Dylan has a brief activity for you. He wants you to copy the 3 sentences on screen, either onto your laptop or your device, or onto a piece of paper. So grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, let's have a go. I'm sorry everyone. Dylan wants to show you what being neurodivergent in a neurotypical classroom can feel like. He wants you to follow a new set of rules. The rules are on screen. As you copy, substitute any vowel that you come across with an at sign. Okay, so you can't write A, E, I, O, U. You have to replace it with an at sign. Dylan says you have 60 seconds to finish copying. Are you ready? Set. Go. Go as quickly as you can. Okay. Some of you are chatting between each other. Yes, you're making too much noise. Look, we've only got a few minutes until we're going to finish up. Some of you might have to stay in if you can't actually get it copied in time. Move along, fast as you can go. Go, 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 go. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. Beautiful, you can do it. Okay, stop there. That's enough, because it's horrible. Because it's horrible. But what would Dylan say to you? The first thing that he would ask you is, those of you who participated, shout out some of the feelings you felt as you were trying to do that. I think that's a great one to start with. Frustrated is a beauty. What else? Pressure. Yeah, mask up. Confusion. Yeah, that's right too. Just shut up. Okay, let me think. Yeah, beautifully said. It is. It was like another code. So you had to cross a divide into a completely different area of your brain to make it work. And what Dylan would say to you really respectfully is, bank those feelings away as educators, or take that activity back to your school and play with other educators with it, because that's how it feels, and we need to be really mindful of those feelings that are generated inadvertently in classrooms. So Dylan and the previous examples highlight what masking and ableism can look like. It is very much a new awareness that is emerging. And together, let's keep this kind of conversation going so that we spread awareness. Today, we would never think a dyslexic student was being uncooperative if they refused to read out loud in front of the class. Our learning and our empathy helps us to understand that in a heartbeat these days. This sort of barrier was gently removed for dyslexics years ago. And this is where our work lies in the neurodivergent area. The truth is, neurodivergent children, especially autistics, face such barriers in classrooms and schools every day. And when challenged by a frustrated or overwhelmed neurodivergent child, it is too easy for a teacher, an educator, to think or even say, "You will do it, everybody else is doing it." No, you can't take a sensory break until after you finish. No, you can't have a sensory break because I don't believe in them. Well, you need to make a choice. It's maths now or it's maths at recess. You're a year 9 student. Don't be ridiculous. And then this educator made the terrified 15-year-old with a pigeon phobia help her scare the pigeons away. And when questioned later, she sincerely believed that flooding senses fixes phobias in autistics, and that was her role. Doing this maths is about having a resilient mindset. I can't make allowances for you. You might not feel like doing the maths, but in real life, you'll have to do things that you don't want to do. One day when you get a job, you'll have to do what you're told. forcing students, neurodiverse or otherwise, will not help their esteem. It will not help their growth, and it will not help their academic outcomes. It harms. Or a school report that says, Tommy strives to present his written efforts legibly. However, this remains an area to improve on. And yet 10-year-old Tommy, who is autistic, dysgraphic, and has hypermobile joints, is actually doing his best. Little wonder why Tommy feels shortchanged. Oh, and don't forget this one. I hear it all the time in my work. The measure of success, according to the department's bureaucrats, is for a child to attend school full-time. Full-time school is not the measure of success, in my incredibly humble opinion. The measure of success is where we engineer conditions at school, whether they be part-time or full-time, where a child can make connections, learn, and actually thrive. So many of my clients are doing just this and will never be able to cope with the harsh reality of full-time school. How do we sort through such negative, ignorant, and damaging mindsets? Well, it all starts with us realising that what a child does in a tricky moment does not define them or their future. It starts with us growing an awareness so we really do know what's outdated and what constitutes progressive thinking. As I start to wrap up, I want to pose a question. Why does this tension exist between truly ethical considerations for neurodivergent students and what currently occurs in day-to-day practice? Let me return to where we started. Most educators are good, well-intentioned people who want to be inclusive and want to offer children and families hope. However, unsupported teachers and leaders can only do so much. And frequently, their unsupported effort comes at a huge cost to their health. As you know, I mentor many kids, but just secretly, many educators too. So often they are tired, overwhelmed, and burnt out. And without exception, these good people tell their version of the same old story. Here are some quotes that sum up that story. Having him in my class changed everything. I needed support. It never came. The experience smashed me and the class I had hoped to create. I felt like an epic fail. Sometimes I wished his family would withdraw him from school. I dreaded getting out of bed each morning to face the day in my classroom with too little help. I hated myself for this, but prayed he'd be sick so I'd have respite. While funding is one aspect to this equation, there is another part that is deeply personal. As a father with an autistic daughter and 2 autistic grandchildren, I'll be brave and I'll raise it. How do you feel about neurodivergence, particularly autism? And I'm not asking for your politically correct response. We're very good at that. I'm speaking to your inner self. How do you feel about this kind of difference deep inside? After all, the early years are often characterised by an emotionally messy and challenging experience for everybody involved, no matter how many clever people continue to popularise it. So autism becomes a distinctly different experience for each one of us. The truth is, our reactions to it, our discomfort about it or our ease with it has a lot to do with our own attitudes and values than it has to do with autism itself. So do you embrace it? Can you embrace it? Do you see it as a variation in the human condition? Do you see it as a blight you must somehow endure? Are you fearful of it? Are you accepting of it? Are you open and prepared to learn? More to the point, can you grow and be a positive force in the lives of young people? I hold great hope for the expansion of neurodiversity in schools. Yes, there is a tension between our desires and the consistency of what's currently happening on the ground. Yes, we are caught up in a liberation, and thanks to the neurodiverse movement and sensitive souls like yourselves, there's no going back. And while on you, never underestimate what you do. Even if you are constrained, you already reach incredible goals with young people and their parents, just quietly, each day, and without fanfare. This is an educator's lot. This is what we do. You definitely guide young people towards realising seemingly simple goals that can make huge differences in their lives. You know, sometimes it's helping someone to believe that they are good enough. You turn up each day with that smile on your face. You switch on your kindness and your emotional steadiness for everyone, even when you're not emotionally steady yourself. But you know a powerful secret. It is that many of your students and their parents require much more than your teaching. They thrive on you, because the level of emotional comfort you offer can be a rarity in the lives of many. The real spirit of the session has been to strengthen a neuro-affirming place in your heart. I trust Maney's illustrations have been fun, thought-provoking and helpful. Please share her neuro-wild artwork with others. I hope I've encouraged you to see some of the unfair barriers, historically almost unnoticed, our neurodivergent young must face. My hope is in our collective influence and in education. Ongoing education is the only way to embrace differences and delight in them as a beautiful variation in the human experience. When this happens, we'll give neurodivergent children the very best opportunity to grow into their uniqueness with pride. Thank you.